Hi everyone. So today I'm going to talk about things I've learnt in, the first few years of my career in terms of inclusive user research. So as Chris mentioned, I'm currently still a student and I'm a junior researcher at the moment. I used to work at Media Access Australia with these guys, where I learnt lots about WCAG and accessibility and inclusion. So today I'm going to kind of talk about things I've learnt, referring to my experience at work as well as my experience in my uni work. So why should you think about inclusion in user research? You've probably seen these stats everywhere. So we've just got a growing population of people facing different barriers, and that number of people is growing, and it's kind of just the right thing to do, which I think we all agree with, seeing as we're at A11y Camp together. So the first section I'll talk about is discovery. I really couldn't find much on the discovery phase in terms of user research when I was actually preparing this talk, because not many people do it unless they are designing a product specifically for people who have disabilities. So, things like Uber, I don't know if they would have included people who have different barriers or whatever in their initial research. I don't know if that's a bad or good thing, but it makes me wonder how innovation would change if, we did do that. But I'll share some things I've learnt so far. So one, acknowledge that whatever your perceived user group is, some of them will have access requirements. At this stage, we should just assume that people will face different things and different problems when they're using your product or your design. So we should acknowledge that and take that into our personas and our user journeys later on. Tip number 2, when you're doing research in the discovery phase, it's good to talk to people who can help you in that space. So say I'm trying to, contact people who are living, who are blind or deaf, I will have to talk to people who are kind of experts in that space. I can't just kind of reach out to a community. So, for example, referring to a project I've done at uni where I'm doing research into Aboriginal health. Not only did I talk to people, I wanted to learn about Aboriginal Australians and their experiences at school. And not only did I talk to students, but I had to talk to psychologists and legal specialists to kind of gain a holistic understanding. Tip number 3, generate empathy. Try to foster it into your team. You may get ideas from this. So if you are designing specifically for people living with disabilities, this may help you to generate ideas about a product or a solution. I'll show you in the next slides. Has anyone here been to Enabled by Designathon by any chance? Yeah? I'll show you. And if you aren't, it's just good to have a team that understands what different people may be facing when they're interacting with technology or digital interfaces. So Enabled by Designathon kicks off the event with empathy exercises. So here's my group trying to install SIM cards into different phones and tablets with kind of goggles that kind of impair your vision, as well as gloves. So we had like a motor impairment, as well as we couldn't see anything. And even opening the boxes was hard. Different places are doing this as well, like The Guardian. They've done like screen reader, keyboard, color blindness, and voice navigation workshops. And Facebook even has empathy labs. So this isn't necessarily like a research technique. They've even said it's not necessarily to test Facebook. It's just to understand how people experience it. It's just a good thing to have with your team. So tip number 4 is to remember to be mindful and aware. Oops, sorry if I'm going too fast. So I've come across some questions that I've had to ask myself when I'm doing research in the discovery phase. Is our interview environment accessible? Can someone even get into the building that I'm trying to get them to speak with them? Am I being sensitive about discussion topics? So if you look at different kind of marginalized communities that face, I don't know if we're researching into mental health or socio-economic or cultural issues, is it triggering for them? Or am I being insensitive when I talk to them or when I'm interviewing them? And is there a way to make an environment more comfortable? Are there ways we can change the way other ways we can kind of change the way we talk to people or conduct our discovery research to make things more comfortable for the users we're talking to. So with those 4 tips in mind, they've helped me to become more empathetic and thoughtful, not just in design, but when I'm talking to anyone. I'm more thoughtful when I conduct interviews. I remember first year of uni when I was conducting my interviews, it was just like a list of questions, and it was just boring or kind of, too leading, I guess. And yeah, my communication skills have improved with the teams I've worked with. So part 2, evaluative, lots of testing stuff, as I've said there. So testing with real users is usually the best thing to do to evaluate or design a product. And here are some things I've run into. So manual evaluations are usually more beneficial than automated tests. My job at Media Access Australia was conducting these manual evaluations. And when we use automated technology to diagnose or to find problems in your interface or whatever, they don't really explain a lot. So here's an example I've put. When you're testing a website, for example, using an automated test, they will know that a semantic heading has been found, that criterion has been met. But when I'm looking at it using a screen reader, I don't understand what the headings are, or even though the headings are there, they're not logical, and the automated tester will not pick up on that. So tip number 6, acknowledge that compliance does not equal a good user experience. So this sounds like an easy thing to think about, but just because your site meets WCAG 2.0 AA doesn't mean it's completely awesome. So here's an example. I actually haven't tested if this is accessible, but I thought it was a good one to show. Say if these links had, clear link purpose and they're all accessible by keyboard, but look at how many there are. Imagine tabbing through that using a screen reader. It would be very tedious. And same thing here, even if these checkboxes are accessible, technically speaking, and even though the tables might be, correctly developed or whatever, it would just be so hard to use. So tip number 7, test with real users. So I was just kidding on the previous slide. Just remember that your manual evaluation does not equal the experience of people living with different conditions. So as I mentioned before, it's good to connect to stakeholders who might have experience working in that disability space, and they can help you connect to other people or help you find participants. So tip number 8, stay sensitive and be mindful and aware. So as mentioned before, it is important to be mindful and aware. I kind of thought about this when I remembered my experience testing with a deaf user. We didn't have an interpreter, and I was doing think aloud testing, and she was just kind of gesturing at different things, and I didn't know how to take notes because I wasn't really prepared for that. So yeah, you've got to think about the different things that might occur. So how have these helped me to become a better designer? I know lots about WCAG from manual evaluations because I have to go through them. So if I had just used automated testing, I wouldn't have known anything about it. That allows me to communicate with developers and designers. I've also become really confident with usability testing because I've had lots of practice with it. And I can identify both compliance and UX issues. So in conclusion, that's kind of been just some quick tips that I've thought of things I've learned over the past 2 years or so in my working life and 3 years of my uni life. I just think it's our collective responsibility to think about inclusion in design and research, and as a result, our products will be better and we will be better. Thank you.